Forget not to subscribe, to leave a comment, and to press the like button. It helps more than you think, and it means I am not speaking into silence. I remember the forest before I remember myself. The shadows of the trees were taller than any house, their trunks like pillars holding up the sky, and the earth beneath my bare feet was always damp, always breathing with the smell of moss and leaves in decay. I was small, no more than 7, perhaps 8, though in memory age is slippery, and the body I recall is light, thin, nearly transparent, as if I could have been blown away with the fog that lingered low between the roots. It was in that forest that I saw her for the first time, the woman no one else ever saw. She stood as though she had grown out of the earth itself, her back slightly bent, her face wrapped in shadows that did not seem to belong to the trees, but to her alone. She was old, older than any grandmother I had ever known, with eyes so dark they seemed bottomless. And she asked me a question, a single question, that dug itself so deep inside me that it never let go. She asked, very softly, "Do you want to know who you are, or do you want to stay blind?" I did not understand then what she meant. I only knew that something in her voice pierced through me, and though I wanted to run, my legs refused to move. I nodded, though timidly, and she smiled, a slow, broken smile, like a crack forming in old glass. From that moment, something inside me shifted, though I could not name it. The forest became both a place of refuge and terror. I would go there when the shouting at home grew too loud, when my father's voice cut through the thin walls of our wooden house, when my mother's silence grew heavy and suffocating. The trees never shouted, the leaves never struck, and yet, in their stillness, I felt a kind of judgment, an endless watching, as if they remembered every footstep, every thought I carried with me. When I told my mother about the woman, she looked at me as though I had spoken a language she did not understand. She told me not to invent lies, that such things were dangerous. My father, had he heard, would have punished me for such talk. He believed that children should be silent, that truth was only what he said it was. So I swallowed my words. I kept the memory of the woman folded like a letter inside my chest, unread by anyone but me. But I saw her again and again, always in the same place where the birch trees bent slightly toward each other, forming an arch like a doorway. Sometimes she spoke, sometimes she only watched. Once she placed a hand on my shoulder, her skin colder than stone in winter, and whispered, "You already carry the answer. You only need to learn how to suffer it." I did not know what suffering meant yet, not fully. I thought it was only when my father's belt cut across my skin, or when loneliness made me cry into my pillow at night. But her words lingered, like a prophecy that unfolded slowly with the years. Life outside the forest moved on, though not gently. School was no refuge either. Children can be cruel in ways that even adults cannot match, and I carried with me the scent of poverty, the stains of neglect. They laughed at my clothes, too thin in winter, too worn in summer. They laughed at the way I spoke, too quiet, too unsure. And every evening I would retreat again into the forest, where the woman sometimes appeared, sometimes not, but always I felt her presence, like a second heartbeat behind my own. There was one evening I will never forget. I had run into the woods after a fight at home. My father had broken a plate, and my mother's face bore a new shadow where his hand had landed. I fled before he could turn to me. The forest was darker than usual, the clouds covering the moon, and I stumbled until I found the arch of the birches. And she was there. This time she looked more alive, her eyes burning as though lit from within. She asked me again, Do you want to know who you are, child? And this time, though my throat trembled, I said yes. She leaned close, and I smelled earth and smoke as if she had been burning deep roots underground. She whispered something into my ear, not a sentence I could repeat, not even words I could fully understand. It was more like a rhythm, a truth that settled in my bones rather than in my mind. I cannot tell you exactly what she said, even now. But from that night on, I carried it, and it led me, though I often wished it hadn't. Don't forget. If you feel something stirring in these words, leave your thoughts below. It means more than you think. The years passed, but she never left me. Even when I tried to banish her, to convince myself she was only a dream born of loneliness, she returned in fragments, her reflection in a puddle, her voice in the cracking of branches, her eyes in the faces of strangers. And always the question remained, do you want to know who you are, or stay blind? I began to see the blindness of others, how they stumbled through life pretending not to feel, not to remember, not to question. My father, blind to his own cruelty. My mother, blind to her own silence. My teachers, blind to the bruises I carried beneath my sleeves. And I wondered, was sight a gift or a curse? Was it better to see too much, or to close your eyes and drift in shadows? I chose sight, though it burned. I chose truth, though it cut. And in that choice lay both my ruin and my survival. It was during one winter night, when the snow had swallowed every path and my breath came in small, painful clouds, that I returned again to the forest. I thought she would not come in such cold, but she was there, waiting, as if she had been standing for centuries. This time, she asked me nothing. Instead, she gave me something, a small object pressed into my palm, a key, rusted, heavy, as though it belonged to a door long buried. When the time comes, she said, you will know what it opens. I carried that key with me for years. I still have it, though the lock it belonged to I never found in any house, in any chest, in any world I knew. Perhaps the lock was inside me, or perhaps I have yet to find it. But it weighed in my pocket like a secret, like proof that I was not imagining her. And so my life unfolded under the shadow of that question, under the weight of that key. Don't forget to like, to subscribe, to speak. Your voice matters more than you think, and silence has cost me too much already. The forest, the woman, the key, they are the beginning of everything I became and everything I lost. And now, as I look back, I see that every step, every wound, every betrayal was tied to that first encounter, to that first whispered question in the woods. I wonder sometimes if blindness would have been kinder. But I did not choose kindness. I chose truth. And truth, once chosen, cannot be unchosen. The nights grew heavier, the house darker, and the secrets began to bleed through the walls. That was when I learned what the woman truly meant by suffering, and why she had given me the choice so early. Because a child who sees cannot unsee. A child who knows cannot unknow. And I was that child. The house in which I grew up seemed alive with silence. A silence that carried weight, pressing against the chest, filling the lungs with something that wasn't air. My father's footsteps on the wooden boards were thunder, measured and slow, and each creak was a warning. I would sit at the edge of my bed, listening, my small hands gripping the blanket until my knuckles burned white, waiting to hear if he would stop at my door or pass by. My mother, always a shadow moving from room to room, eyes cast down, lips pressed thin, rarely spoke when he was home. It was as if she too was part of the furniture and object to be noticed only when needed and punished when not. And always, inside me, the memory of the woman in the forest pulsed like a second heart. She had given me the key, and with it, the unbearable weight of knowing that there was more. More than these walls, more than this house of cruelty, more than the names whispered at school, more than the bruises I hid beneath layers of clothes. There was something locked away, waiting for me. But to reach it, I would have to keep my eyes open, even when they burned. I would sometimes take the key from its hiding place, a loose floorboard beneath my bed, and hold it against the candlelight. Its metal was dark, pitted with rust, and yet it glimmered as though the flame belonged to it. I wondered if the woman had pulled it from the earth itself, or if it had belonged to someone before me, someone who had once asked the same question, who had once chosen sight over blindness. And I wondered, what had become of them? School offered no refuge. The children laughed at me, their cruelty sharp and precise like blades honed on envy and ignorance. They laughed at the way my clothes hung too loose, the way my hair never shone like theirs, the way I never joined their games. But worse than their laughter was their indifference. When I limped, when I winced, when my arms bore fresh shadows beneath the sleeves, no one asked. The teachers looked away, as though the truth was too inconvenient to name. That, too, was blindness. And blindness, I had come to understand, was a choice. So I learned to keep my secrets. I spoke less, listened more. I learned the language of silence, the way a slammed door could mean danger, the way a broken plate could mean storm, the way a lowered gaze could mean surrender. The world was a series of codes, and I read them all, because to misread them was to suffer. But the woman in the forest did not allow me to surrender. Each time I returned to her, she seemed older, as though years passed for her more swiftly than for anyone else. Her eyes sank deeper into her face, and yet they burned brighter. Sometimes she said nothing, only stood there, her breath visible in the air, her presence both terrifying and comforting. Other times, she asked questions I could not answer. What is your name when no one calls you? Who do you belong to when no one claims you? What remains when they take everything? These questions followed me into my dreams. I would wake in the night, sweat cooling on my skin, the sound of her voice still echoing in my ears. I would clutch the key in my palm until the edges bit into my flesh, until pain grounded me again in the world I knew, the world of walls, of footsteps, of silence. There were nights when I thought I saw her standing at the edge of my bed, her figure bending in the candlelight, her eyes darker than the shadows around her. I would blink, and she would vanish, leaving only the faint smell of smoke and earth. My mother once asked me why I looked so tired in the mornings, why my eyes were ringed with shadows. I wanted to tell her, but the words stuck in my throat. She would not believe me. She had chosen blindness long ago. Don't forget to subscribe, to comment if these words reach you. It helps me know that I am not whispering into an empty room. It was during one summer that everything began to shift. I was perhaps 11, perhaps 12, the age when childhood begins to fracture, when innocence can no longer hold against what the world demands. My father had been drinking more, his anger swelling with each empty bottle, and my mother had learned to disappear into silence for longer stretches. I, too, disappeared into the forest. One evening, when the light fell gold between the branches and the air hummed with insects, I found the woman waiting for me again at the birch arch. But this time, she was not alone. Behind her, further into the shadows, I thought I saw movement, a flicker, a shape, gone before I could name it. She noticed my stare, and her cracked smile deepened. "There are always others," she said, her voice rough as bark. "But they will only reveal themselves when you are ready to see them." I wanted to ask her who they were, what they wanted, why only I could see her, but my tongue felt heavy, my mouth dry. Instead, I asked, "Why me?" She tilted her head, her hair falling forward in gray tangles. "Because you listened." It was the simplest answer, and yet the heaviest. Because I listened. Because I had not turned away. Because I had chosen to see, even when it hurt. I left the forest that evening with the sound of her voice clinging to me, with the rusted key pressing into my thigh through the thin fabric of my dress. And I knew, though I did not yet understand, that nothing in my life would ever be simple again. Years later, when I would look back on that summer, I would see it as the beginning of the unraveling, the slow, painful tearing away of everything I thought I knew about myself, about my family, about the world. But in that moment, I was only a child, clutching a secret too heavy for my hands, walking home through the fading light, where my father's anger and my mother's silence waited like wolves at the door. And yet, even as fear pressed against me, I felt something else, something dangerous, something alive. A spark of defiance, a hunger to know what lay beyond the blindness. It was that hunger that carried me forward. It was that hunger that nearly destroyed me. The hunger grew inside me like a second soul, restless and insistent, gnawing at the edges of every quiet moment. I began to look at the world differently, not only with the eyes of a child, but with the eyes she had opened in me. The woman from the forest had planted something, and it rooted deeper with each passing day. I noticed things I was not meant to notice, the way my father's rage always came after a silence too long, the way my mother's hands trembled when she thought no one was watching, the way the neighbors turned away when they heard shouting through our thin walls. The blindness of others was everywhere. It was in the children at school who laughed at my bruises, but never asked how they came to be. It was in the priest's eyes when I came to church and whispered prayers that were not for salvation but for escape. It was in the faces of women at the market, who glanced at me, then at my mother, then quickly at the ground, as though shame were contagious. I wanted to scream at them, to shake them awake, to tell them that silence was not protection, it was complicity, but my voice was small, and my body still belonged to the hands and rules of others. So I returned again and again to the forest. It was there that I felt the closest to freedom, even though freedom was only an illusion, a fleeting sensation before I returned home. Each time I found her, the woman looked different, as though the forest itself changed her. Sometimes her eyes were as sharp as broken glass. Sometimes they were cloudy, as though she were fading. But always she spoke with certainty, and always she asked me questions no one else dared to ask. One evening, when twilight bled into the trees and the first stars trembled in the sky, she said, "One day you will be asked to choose between silence and truth will cost you everything." I did not answer. I was afraid of what she meant. I was afraid of what everything could mean, because already I felt I had so little. But her words burrowed into me like seeds waiting for the right season to bloom. At night, I began to dream of doors. Endless doors, stretching into darkness, each one locked. I would run from one to the next, the rusted key burning in my palm, trying to find which lock it belonged to. Sometimes I would hear voices behind the doors, my mother's muffled cries, my father's booming rage, the laughter of children at school, the silence of strangers. Sometimes I thought I heard her voice too, the woman from the forest, urging me forward. But no matter how many doors I tried, none opened. I would wake with the key still in my hand, its sharp teeth pressing deep into my skin, leaving marks that only I could see. Don't forget, if you're still listening, leave a small trace of yourself, a word, a sign, a voice. It reminds me that I am not alone in this telling. There was one night I will never forget. My father had been drinking heavily. His words slurred, but his anger sharpened all the same. My mother had tried to hide in the kitchen, moving like a ghost among the pots and pans, but he found her. I heard the sound before I saw it, the crack, the dull thud, the sharp gasp that cut off too quickly. My body moved before my mind did, and I stepped into the doorway, my eyes wide, my breath shallow. His hand was raised, his face red. My mother crumpled at his feet, and then he turned to me. I do not remember if he struck me that night. I remember only the feeling, the weight of his gaze, the certainty that I was next. I remember the taste of metal in my mouth, though I had not yet bled. I remember the sound of the clock on the wall, ticking too loud, marking every second as if to remind me that time itself was watching. Later, when I lay in my bed, trembling, I thought of the woman's words, silence or truth. I thought of how my mother chose silence, how the neighbors chose silence, how even the priest chose silence. And I wondered, was I destined for the same? The next morning, I took the key from beneath the floorboard and carried it with me to the forest. The air was heavy with the smell of damp earth, and the trees seemed to lean closer, as though listening. She was there, waiting, as if she had known I would come. Her eyes softened when she saw me clutching the key. "You are learning," she said. "But learning will not save you. Only courage will." I wanted to ask her what courage looked like, how one found it, how one carried it when the world pressed so heavily against your chest. But before I could, she raised her hand and touched my face, her skin cold as stone. "One day soon, you will stand at a threshold. When you cross it, nothing will be the same. Do not run from it." I swallowed her words like medicine, bitter and slow to dissolve. That night, I dreamed again of doors. But this time, one of them opened. I stepped through, and what I saw is something I have carried all my life. It was my house, but not as I knew it. The walls were cracked and crumbling, the windows shattered, the roof sagging under the weight of years. My father sat at the table, but he was not whole. His body was broken, twisted, his face shadowed beyond recognition. My mother sat opposite him, but her mouth was sewn shut, her eyes hollow. And between them, at the center of the table, lay the key, glowing faintly, pulsing like a heart. I woke screaming, the sound tearing from me before I could stop it. My mother came rushing in, her eyes wide, her voice shaking as she asked what was wrong. I could not tell her. She would not have believed me. She had chosen blindness, and I had chosen sight. And once chosen, sight cannot be undone. The days that followed were filled with small fractures. The laughter of other children sounded crueler. The sermons in church felt emptier. The silences at home grew longer, more suffocating. And inside me, the hunger grew sharper, until it was no longer a hunger, but a wound, open, raw, demanding. That was when I began to write. I found scraps of paper, the backs of old letters, margins of discarded books, and I wrote what I could not say aloud. I wrote of the woman, of the key, of the dreams, of the doors. I wrote of the shouting, the silence, the blows. I wrote because words were the only place I could be honest, the only place I could choose truth without being punished for it. But even paper is not safe when eyes pry where they should not. One evening, my father found my hidden pages. His face darkened as he read, his hands shaking not with fear but with fury. He tore them to pieces before my eyes, his voice booming that lies would not be tolerated under his roof. My mother stood behind him, silent, her eyes begging me to apologize, to bow my head, to let it pass. But I did not apologize. For the first time, I lifted my head and I looked him in the eyes. The truth burned in me, and though I said nothing, my silence was no longer submission, it was defiance. And in that moment, I thought I saw her again, the woman from the forest standing just behind him, her cracked smile watching, her eyes alight with something I could not name. He did not strike me that night. Perhaps it was because my gaze did not waver. Perhaps because he saw something in me that unsettled him. Or perhaps he was too drunk, too consumed by his own storms to carry it further. But the silence after he tore my words was heavier than any blow. The scraps of paper lay scattered across the floor, like fallen feathers from a bird that would never fly again. My mother bent to pick them up, her hands trembling, her lips pressed tight, as though gathering the pieces of my voice would restore something. But nothing was restored. Something was broken, and not just in me. I remember going outside that night, barefoot, the earth cold under my soles. The moon was full, casting light that felt almost merciless in its clarity. I held the key in my hand and walked to the edge of the forest, where the shadows began. I did not dare go deeper. My father would notice my absence if I lingered, but I stood there, waiting, hoping. And then I heard her, though I did not see her. Her voice drifted between the trees, low and rough, as though the forest itself spoke. "Words can be destroyed," she said, "but truth cannot. Remember this." I clenched the key until it cut my skin, and I swore to myself that I would not let him take the truth from me, not even if he burned every page I wrote, not even if he broke me bone by bone. I did not yet know what that promise would cost. At school, things grew worse. Children sense when someone carries secrets, and secrets are like blood in the water. They draw cruelty. My clothes became more ragged, my shoes more worn, and their laughter more biting. They mocked me for being thin, for smelling of smoke and dampness, for the way my hands shook when I tried to answer a question. Once, a boy shoved me so hard I fell, and my elbow split open against the gravel. I bled, but I did not cry. Instead, I looked at him the way I had looked at my father, unflinching. It silenced him, if only for a moment, but it also marked me. I was no longer just strange. I was dangerous in a way they did not understand. It was around this time that I began to feel the forest calling me more strongly. I would hear whispers in the rustling leaves, see shapes shifting in the corner of my vision, feel the pull of the birch arch even when I tried to resist. And each time I went, the woman was there, or the absence of her was. For sometimes she did not appear, and that absence was louder than her presence. I would stand there for hours, clutching the key, waiting for her cracked smile, for her questions that unraveled me. One day she came when I had almost given up hope. Her eyes were dimmer, her step slower, as if she were carrying a burden of her own. She looked at me for a long time before speaking. "You are learning too quickly," she said. "Children should not see so much. It will break you." I shook my head. "It is already breaking me," I whispered. She smiled then, that same broken smile, and placed her hand over mine, pressing the key deeper into my palm. "Then let it break you. The pieces will be sharper than what you were whole." Her words were a curse and a blessing all at once. They terrified me, yet I knew they were true. And in the days that followed, I began to feel the breaking more keenly. My mother grew thinner, her eyes more hollow. Sometimes I caught her staring at me with an expression I could not name. Was it pity? Was it regret? Was it fear? She never spoke of it. She never spoke of anything. I wanted to ask her if she too had once met a woman in the forest. If she too had once been asked the same question. But I never dared. She had built her blindness like a wall, and I knew she would never let me climb it. My father grew harsher, his anger now a constant undercurrent, like a storm that never ended. The smallest thing could set him off, a misplaced cup, a sound too loud, a silence too long. He became a presence that filled every room even when he was not in it, a shadow stretching across every corner of the house. Don't forget, if you feel the weight of these words, leave a trace, a small light in the dark. It helps me to know this story is not swallowed by silence. One night, after another storm had passed through our house, I lay awake listening to the steady ticking of the clock. Its rhythm was relentless, marking time as if daring me to endure. And I thought of the dream I had had, the one where the clock, the table, the key, and my parents were all twisted into something grotesque. I wondered if the dream had been a warning, if the woman had planted it in me so I would know that my house was not just a house, but a trap, a cage. The next morning, I decided to run. Not forever. I was still too small, too bound by fear, but for a moment. I stuffed a piece of bread into my pocket, clutched the key, and went deeper into the forest than I had ever gone before. The air grew colder, the trees denser, the light dimmer. My heart raced, but my feet did not stop. It felt as though the forest itself was guiding me, pulling me forward to something I could not yet see. After what felt like hours, I stumbled upon a clearing. In the center stood a single stone, tall and weathered, its surface carved with markings I could not read. And there, leaning against it, was the woman. She looked at me with a mixture of sorrow and pride, as though she had known all along I would find my way there. "This is where it begins," she said softly, "and this is where it ends." I wanted to ask her what she meant, but before I could, she raised her hand and pointed to the stone. At its base was a small hollow, and within it something glimmered faintly. I knelt and reached inside, my fingers brushing against cold metal. When I pulled it out, I gasped. It was another key, smaller, lighter, but with the same strange weight of meaning. I turned to her, desperate for explanation, but she only shook her head. "Not yet," she whispered. "When the time comes, you will know which lock it opens. Until then, carry it. And remember, the doors are closer than you think." I took the key, and from that day on, I carried both. One rusted and heavy, one small and gleaming. Together, they pressed against me like twin hearts, beating in silence, waiting. And though I did not yet understand it, I knew that my life was no longer only mine. It belonged to the question, to the keys, to the forest, to the truth I had chosen over blindness. It was only a matter of time before the doors began to appear again, not in dreams, but in waking life. The doors began as shadows, outlines barely visible where no door should be, between two trees. Against the wall of our crumbling house, even in the corners of my own room. At first I thought they were tricks of the light, the play of exhaustion on my eyes. But then the outlines grew clearer, sharper, until I could no longer deny them. They pulsed faintly, as if breathing, as if waiting for me. And each time, when I reached into my pocket and touched the keys, the shadows seemed to lean closer, urging me to try. I did not. Not yet. I was too afraid. Afraid of what might be behind them, afraid of what it would mean to open them. Because if I opened one, I could never again pretend blindness. The house grew heavier with each passing season. My father's anger was no longer confined to evenings with drink. It seeped into mornings, into afternoons, into every hour. My mother shrank more and more until she was like a wisp of smoke drifting from room to room, her presence barely clinging to the world. Sometimes I thought she looked at me with a flicker of something recognition, perhaps that I was not like her, that I had chosen a different path. But she never spoke it aloud. Silence was her only shield, and she wore it until it covered her entire being. At school, the cruelty of children had shifted into something quieter, more insidious. They no longer mocked me openly. Instead, they avoided me, as if I carried a sickness. My presence unsettled them, the way I watched too closely, the way my words came too slowly, too measured, as though weighed against truths they did not want to hear. I became invisible, and invisibility was both safety and loneliness. And so the forest became my only refuge, the only place where the weight of silence lifted, even if it was only to be replaced by another kind of burden. I returned to the stone with the carvings, to the hollow where I had found the second key. Sometimes the woman was there, sometimes she was not, but always the place felt alive, charged with something older than words. One evening, when the air was thick with the smell of rain and the first drops clung to my hair, I found her waiting again. She looked frailer than before, her body bowed, her face more shadow than flesh, yet her eyes burned brighter than ever. She studied me for a long time before she spoke. "You are close," she said. "Closer than you know. But once you step through, there is no return." I held out the 2 keys in my palms, trembling. "Which door?" I asked. She shook her head slowly. "That is for you to decide. I cannot choose for you. I only asked you the question. The answer has always been yours." Her words filled me with a strange mix of terror and strength. To know that the choice was mine, that it had always been mine, was almost unbearable. But it was also the first time I felt the faint pulse of freedom. That night, the doors appeared everywhere. Against the hallway where my father's shadow stretched, against the kitchen wall where my mother stood in silence, even at the foot of my bed. Their outlines glowed faintly, urging me, tempting me. I did not sleep. I sat awake, clutching the keys, listening to the ticking of the clock and the breathing of the doors. Don't forget, if these words stir something in you, leave a sign. A single word is enough. It is how I know the silence is breaking. Days blurred into weeks, and still the doors lingered. I began to see them not only at home, but in the village, in the school, even in the church. I wondered if anyone else saw them, or if blindness shielded them from such visions. I watched my classmates, my teachers, the priest, the neighbors. None reacted. They walked past as though nothing was there, and I realized with a cold certainty that sight was mine alone. The woman's words echoed. Children should not see so much. It will break you. And I was breaking. My body grew thinner, my eyes darker, my hands restless. I could not eat without feeling the weight of the keys in my pocket, could not pray without hearing the whisper of the doors. One evening, after another storm in the house, my father shouting, my mother silent, dishes broken, silence heavier than sound, I slipped out into the forest. The air was sharp with the scent of pine and earth, the sky swollen with clouds. I walked until I reached the stone, my heart pounding with a rhythm not my own. And there, at the base of the stone, was a door. Not a shadow this time, but solid, real. Its wood was blackened as though burned, its frame heavy with carvings like the ones on the stone. My hands shook as I drew the 2 keys from my pocket. They glimmered faintly, as if alive. The woman appeared then, though I did not hear her arrive. One moment the clearing was empty, the next she was there, watching. Her voice was little more than a whisper, carried by the wind. If you open it, you will not be the same. If you turn away, you will never stop wondering. I stood frozen, both keys burning in my hands. I thought of my father's face, twisted with rage. I thought of my mother's silence, her eyes hollow. I thought of the children's cruelty, of the neighbors' indifference, of the priest's empty prayers. I thought of blindness and of truth, and then I chose. I placed the smaller key into the lock. It slid in smoothly, as though it had always belonged. My hand trembled as I turned it, the sound of the mechanism loud as thunder in the stillness. The door creaked open, the smell of smoke and earth rushing out, the air colder than anything I had ever known. Behind me, the woman whispered one final time. "Remember, you asked for sight." I stepped through. What I found on the other side was not what I expected. It was not another world, not at first. It was my house. But it was my house stripped bare, as though time had scoured it. The walls crumbled, the floor warped, the roof open to the sky. My father sat at the table, his body broken, his face shadowed. My mother sat opposite, her mouth sewn shut, her eyes hollow. And between them, on the table, lay the larger key, glowing faintly, pulsing like a heart. I reached for it, though I already carried it in my pocket. My hand passed through it like smoke, and I stumbled back, trembling. The shadows deepened, the air grew thick, and the clock on the wall began to tick louder and louder, though no clock hung there. Each tick was like a hammer against my skull. I fell to my knees, covering my ears, but the sound was inside me. And then, through the roar, I heard her voice. "This is what blindness protects you from. This is what sight demands." The vision shattered, and I was back in the clearing, the door closed behind me, the keys heavy in my palms. The woman was gone. Only the stone remained, silent, immovable. I stumbled home that night, my clothes damp with sweat, my hands shaking. No one noticed my absence. My father was asleep, his snores heavy. My mother sat by the window, staring into the darkness. She turned her head slightly when I entered, and for a moment I thought I saw recognition in her eyes, but she said nothing. I crawled into bed, the keys pressed against my chest. Sleep did not come. Only the ticking of the unseen clock filled the silence, steady, merciless, reminding me that time was no longer mine. It belonged to the truth I had chosen. From that night on, I could no longer pretend to be blind. The doors did not vanish. They multiplied. They appeared in every shadow, every silence, every moment when I closed my eyes. They followed me, waiting, whispering, and I knew that one day I would have to open another. Because once you choose sight, there's no end to the doors. There's only the next, and the next, and the next, and each one demands something more. I began to live in two worlds, the one everyone else saw, and the one that unfolded beneath it like roots beneath the soil. In the first world, I was still the girl in ragged clothes, silent in class, flinching at home, invisible in the streets. But in the second, shadows breathed, doors appeared, and the weight of the keys never left me. It was not that one world replaced the other. Rather, they bled into each other until I could no longer tell where blindness ended and sight began. The nights became the hardest. By day, I could occupy myself with chores, with school, with the endless tasks of survival. But at night, the silence pressed closer, and the ticking of the clock in the hallway grew louder, sharper, as though it wanted to pierce my skull. Sometimes, when the clock struck midnight, I would hear footsteps that were not my father's, slow and deliberate, moving through the house. I would hold my breath, my hand wrapped tightly around the keys, waiting for the steps to pass. They always stopped at my door. Sometimes the handle would turn, but the door never opened. Instead, the shadow of another door would appear on the wood itself, glowing faintly, waiting. I did not dare open it, not yet. But the temptation was constant. One evening, when the air smelled of iron and rain, I returned to the forest after my father had left for the tavern. The sky was swollen with clouds, the light dim, and the trees seemed closer than ever, their branches reaching toward one another like hands. When I reached the clearing, the woman was waiting, her figure darker, thinner, as though the forest had drained her. Her eyes fixed on me with something like urgency. "You stepped through once," she said, "and you will again. But beware, each door takes more than it gives." I asked her what it would take, but she only shook her head. That is the nature of sight. It costs you what you do not expect. I wanted to tell her that I was tired, that the weight of the keys was too much, that I longed to return to blindness, even if only for a day. But I could not form the words, because even as I thought them, I knew they were lies. I could never return. The first step had already bound me. She placed her hand on my shoulder, colder than stone, heavier than flesh. "Then be ready. The doors will not wait forever." That night, as I lay in bed, I dreamed again of the table, of my father and mother bound in silence, of the glowing key. But this time, there was a third figure seated between them. The woman. She stared at me, her eyes burning, her cracked smile widening. And in her hand, she held scissors, sharp and silver. With slow precision, she lifted them toward her own face, and one by one, she cut the lines of her smile wider and wider until it was not a smile at all, but a wound. I woke screaming, clutching the keys to my chest. The image burned into me like fire. My mother rushed in, her hands trembling as she touched my face, but she said nothing. She only looked at me as though she knew something she could not speak. My father stirred in the other room, and she quickly slipped away, back into her silence. "Don't forget, if you carry pieces of this with you, leave them behind for me to see. It is the only way I know these words are not swallowed whole." The days became unbearable. The doors multiplied, and with them, the pressure in my chest. My body grew weaker, my appetite vanished, my sleep turned to fragments. Teachers whispered about my pallor, neighbors cast wary glances, but no one asked, not really. Their blindness was armor, and they would not set it down for me. One afternoon, after school, I wandered through the village aimlessly, the smaller key clutched in my hand. I passed the church, its bell tolling dully, and saw another door etched in the shadow of its walls. I passed the market, the laughter of women rising like smoke, and in the reflection of a puddle, I saw a door opening behind me. I passed the graveyard, where stones leaned like tired men, and the ground itself seemed to breathe with hidden thresholds. It was everywhere, inescapable. And with every glimpse, I felt the woman's question echo louder. "Do you want to know who you are, or stay blind?" I wanted to scream that I already knew. That I was a child broken by her father's hand, silenced by her mother's lips, abandoned by her neighbors, mocked by her peers. That I was nothing. That was who I was. But some part of me knew this was not the answer. That her question reached deeper into places I had not yet touched. The second door came to me on a winter night. The snow lay thick against the house, muffling every sound, the air sharp enough to cut. My father had drunk himself into sleep, my mother sat unmoving by the fire, and I lay in bed staring at the ceiling. And then it came, the faint glow at the corner of the room, the outline of a door where the wall should be. This time, it did not wait. The handle began to turn, slowly, insistently. I rose from bed, my legs trembling, the keys cold in my hand. I crossed the room, my breath fogging in the air, though no window was open. When I placed the larger key against the lock, the glow brightened, the ticking of the clock in the hall growing louder, faster, until it was almost unbearable. The lock clicked, the door creaked open. I stepped through. This time, I was not in the ruins of my house. I was in the forest, but not the forest I knew. The trees towered higher, their trunks darker, their branches twisted. The ground pulsed faintly, as though alive, and scattered among the roots were objects, broken toys, rusted knives, torn fabric, bones. Each object glimmered faintly, as though lit from within. The woman stood at the center, her body barely holding together, her smile too wide. She raised her hand and pointed to the ground at my feet. There, half buried in the soil, was a mirror. I knelt and brushed away the dirt, my reflection trembling in its surface. But it was not my reflection. It was me, older, hollow-eyed, mouth sewn shut like my mother's. I dropped the mirror with a cry, my hands shaking. When I looked up, the woman was closer, her face inches from mine. "This is what becomes of those who choose silence," she whispered. "This is who you will be if you turn away now." The mirror cracked, the sound sharp as thunder, and the forest dissolved around me. I was back in my room, the door gone, the keys burning in my palms. The clock struck midnight, each chime echoing through my bones. I did not sleep again that night. I sat in the dark, staring at the walls, waiting for the next door, the next vision, the next truth, because I knew then what the woman had meant all along. Sight was not a gift. It was a demand, and it would not stop demanding until it had taken everything. I began to carry the weight of the nights into the days, and soon there was no dividing line between them. My eyes, always ringed with shadows, saw too much. I could no longer look at people without noticing what was hidden beneath their surfaces. My teachers' voices trembled with unspoken regrets. The priest's hands shook when he lifted the chalice, his gaze averted from the children in the front pews. The neighbors' laughter rang hollow, stretched over emptiness like skin over bone. I began to understand that blindness was not absence, it was a choice. Everyone around me had chosen it, and they clung to it as to life itself. I alone had chosen sight, and sight is loneliness. The woman no longer appeared only in the forest. At times, I would glimpse her figure in the corner of my eye, reflected in a pane of glass or the sheen of water. Once, as I scrubbed the kitchen floor, I saw her standing in the well of soap water in my bucket, her eyes staring back at me from the surface. Another time, in the reflection of the church windows, her cracked smile flickered where my own face should have been. My mother noticed the way I started, the way my breath caught, but she said nothing. Her silence grew heavier as I grew more restless. The keys were constant companions now, their weight pressing against me no matter where I went. Sometimes, in the middle of lessons, I would slip my hand into my pocket and feel their edges biting into my palm, reminding me that they were not symbols, not trinkets, they were promises. Promises of doors, of truths, of costs I had not yet paid. And the doors kept coming. One appeared in the hallway at school, its outline glowing faintly against the plaster, while children laughed and shouted around it, oblivious. Another appeared in the church, behind the altar, pulsing softly as the priest intoned empty words. Once, most terribly, I saw a door etched into the shadow of my father himself, as he sat at the table, his face half in light, half in darkness. I looked away quickly, afraid that if I stared too long, it would open, and I would be dragged into whatever lay inside him. Don't forget, if you are still listening, leave a word, a sign. It is how I know that what I carry does not vanish into nothingness. The breaking point came during a winter so harsh that even the air seemed brittle. The cold seeped through the walls, frost bloomed on the inside of the windows, and our breaths hung in the rooms like ghosts. Food was scarce, tempers shorter than ever. My father's rages multiplied, each one sharper, more destructive, while my mother drifted further into her silence, her body shrinking day by day. One night, the storm outside matched the storm within. My father had thrown a chair, its wood splintering against the wall. My mother flinched but said nothing, her hands clutching the hem of her dress. I stood frozen in the doorway, the keys like fire in my pocket. And then I saw it, the largest door yet, glowing fiercely against the far wall, so bright it almost lit the room. My father did not see it. My mother did not see it. Only I did. The sound of the clock ticked louder, faster, until it drowned out everything else. My father's voice, my mother's silence, the howling wind outside, all swallowed by the relentless ticking. I could no longer breathe. My hands moved on their own, pulling out the keys, fitting the larger one into the invisible lock. The moment the teeth slid home, the air shifted, heavy and charged. The door opened, and I stepped through. This time, I was not taken to ruins, nor to twisted forests. I was taken deeper into something that felt both outside and inside myself. It was a corridor, endless, lined with mirrors on both sides. Each mirror held a reflection of me, but not as I was. They showed me as I could be, as I might be, as I feared I would become. In one, I was older, my face hollow, my eyes dead, my mouth sewn shut like my mother's. In another, I was twisted with rage, my fists bloody, my voice a roar like my father's. In another still, I was small again, no older than 7, my eyes wide with terror, frozen forever in that moment before the woman first spoke to me. And then there were mirrors that showed me things I could not understand me in places I had never seen, faces of strangers around me, shadows stretching from my hands. Each reflection was a possibility, a thread of who I might be. At the end of the corridor stood the woman. Her figure was clearer now, sharper, as though the mirrors themselves fed her. She raised her hand, beckoning me forward. "This is who you are," she said, her voice echoing from every reflection. "Not one, but many. Each choice is a mirror. Each door is a path." I walked slowly, my breath shallow, my hands trembling. With each step, the mirrors cracked, splintering into shards that fell without sound. By the time I reached her, the corridor was lined with fragments, each one reflecting pieces of me, an eye, a hand, a mouth, a shadow. She placed her hand over mine, cold and unyielding. "Do you still want to see?" I could not speak. My throat was tight, my heart racing, but I nodded. Her cracked smile widened, and she leaned close. "Then remember, sight is hunger. It will never be satisfied, and once you begin to feed it, it will consume you." The mirrors shattered all at once, the sound like thunder, and I was thrown back into my body. I lay on the floor of our house, gasping, the keys burning in my palm, my father staring at me with confusion, my mother with fear. Neither had seen the door, the corridor, the mirrors. To them, I had simply collapsed, as though fainting. My father muttered about weakness, about uselessness, but he did not strike me. My mother tried to lift me, her hands shaking, but I pulled away. I could not bear her touch, not when I had seen her reflection sewn shut, not when I had felt the weight of what blindness cost her. That night I did not sleep. I sat awake, the keys in my hands, the echoes of shattered glass ringing in my ears. I knew then that there would be no end. Each door opened to another. Each truth demanded a heavier price. And I, too young, too fragile, was already bound to this path. I sometimes wonder if the woman had tricked me that first day in the forest, if her question had been a snare, not a choice. But even as I ask it, I know the truth. She did not trick me. I chose, I nodded, I said yes. And once you say yes to sight, there is no unseeing. Don't forget to breathe life into this silence with a sign, because silence is what destroys, and voices are all we have against it. The doors did not stop. They multiplied, and each one took me closer to the heart of a truth so heavy, so unbearable, that even now, as an old woman, I carry its weight in every breath I take. But I will tell you, because once you have seen, you owe the telling. And once you have chosen sight, you cannot keep it to yourself. The next door was the one that changed everything. It did not appear in my house, or in the forest, or in a dream. It appeared in a place I never thought it would. It appeared inside me. I first felt it as a pressure, deep in my chest, like a door swelling against its hinges, straining to burst open. It was not visible to anyone else, not even to my own eyes, when I stared into mirrors, searching for cracks across my skin. But I knew it was there. The ticking of the unseen clock seemed to come from inside me now, not from the hallway, not from the walls. Every breath felt heavier, as though I was carrying wood and iron within my ribs. It began at night. I would lie in bed, my body still, but inside me something shifted, pressed, demanded. Sometimes I dreamed that my chest split open, and behind my bones was not a heart, but a lock, glowing faintly, waiting for the keys. I would wake gasping, clutching my breast, certain that if I pressed hard enough, I would feel the outline of the keyhole beneath my skin. And the woman knew. When I next saw her in the forest, she looked at me with an expression I had never seen on her before, almost pity. She reached out, pressing her cold fingers against my chest, and whispered, "Yes, the door has found you. And when you open it, you will not only see, you will be seen." Those words haunted me. To be seen was more terrifying than to see. Sight gave me power, however heavy it was, but to be seen meant exposure, meant no hiding, no safety. I had lived my whole childhood in shadows, in silence, in secrecy. The thought that someone might look through me as I looked through others chilled me more deeply than my father's anger ever had. But the pressure grew. By day, I walked the village with an ache in my chest, my hands pressed against the spot, as though to keep the door shut. By night, I twisted in bed, hearing the handle rattle from within, the ticking louder, faster, as though the clock inside me was racing towards something inevitable. Don't forget, if these words reach you, if they move anything inside you, let me know. Even a whisper is enough, because to tell this is to open that door again, and I cannot bear to believe I am doing it into emptiness. The breaking came one evening when the world outside and the world inside collided. My father had returned home drunk, his rage boiling over some imagined slight. My mother shrank into her silence, her hands folded tightly in her lap. I stood in the corner, small, my breath shallow, watching as the storm built. His hand struck her face, the sound sharp, final. She did not cry out. She never did. And then something inside me shifted. The pressure in my chest grew unbearable, the ticking deafening, and I felt it, the handle turning from within. I gasped, clutching at myself, but it was too late. The door opened. I fell to my knees, the world around me dissolving. My father's shouts became echoes, my mother's silence a shadow. I was somewhere else, though my body remained in the room. Inside me stretched a vast, dark hall, lined with doors on both sides, hundreds, thousands, all glowing faintly. Each one pulsed with a rhythm that was not my own, though it beat inside me. I stumbled forward, my breath shallow, my hands trembling. The keys in my pocket grew hotter, heavier, as though they belonged here, as though they had always belonged here. I tried one in the nearest lock, and the door swung open instantly, without resistance. Behind it, I saw my father, not as he was in that moment, but as a boy, small, terrified, hiding beneath a table while a man's footsteps thundered above him. I saw the belt, the blows, the silence of his own mother. I saw his fear turn to rage, his rage turn to cruelty. I saw the boy who would become the man who now ruled our house with fists and silence. I stumbled back, slamming the door shut, my stomach heaving. I tried another. Behind it was my mother, young, her eyes bright, her voice alive. She stood in a field, laughing, until a shadow fell across her. A hand grabbed her wrist, pulled her away, and I watched as the light left her eyes. Slowly, steadily, until she was the husk I knew. Every door I opened showed me a truth, not just of my parents, but of everyone around me. The priest with trembling hands, the neighbors with their hollow laughter, the children with their cruel smiles. Each carried a door within them, each hid behind silence, each bore scars I had not imagined. And I could see them all, but worse than what I saw was what I felt. Because when the door inside me opened, I knew I was no longer only seeing. I was being seen. The shadows in the hall leaned closer, their outlines pressing against the edges of the doors. I felt eyes on me, eyes that had waited for this moment, eyes that were patient, hungry. I fled, slamming the door within myself shut with all the strength I had. When I returned to my body, I was on the floor, gasping. My mother crouched over me, her face pale, my father watching with suspicion. They thought I had fainted. But I knew the truth. I had opened the door inside me, and it would never stay closed again. From that day on, I could not look at anyone without seeing their doors. Sometimes they flickered faintly in their chests. Sometimes they blazed so brightly I had to look away. I knew now why people chose blindness. To carry sight was to carry everyone else's pain, their scars, their truths, and it was unbearable. But it was mine. The woman appeared less often after that. When she did, she looked weaker, as though her own body was unraveling. Once I asked her if she too had opened the door within herself. She only smiled, her cracked lips trembling, and said, "Once, and it has never closed." I began to understand then. She was not a guide, not a guardian. She was a mirror of what I might become, a figure hollowed out by sight, carrying truths that no one else could bear. Don't forget, if you are still here, still listening, leave even the smallest mark. Each mark is a door opening outward, a sign that this story does not remain locked inside me. The pressure never left me after that. Some nights I could hold the door closed. Other nights it burst open, and I walked the hall of mirrors and doors until dawn, stumbling back into my body with eyes that no longer belonged to a child. Each time I opened one, I carried its truth with me, heavier and heavier, until I could barely stand under the weight. And still, the woman's question echoed, "Do you want to know who you are, or stay blind?" I had thought I had answered it years before in the forest as a child. But I realize now that the question was not asked only once. It was asked again and again, with each door, with each truth, with each reflection. Sight was not a choice made once, it was a choice made every day, every hour, every breath, and I kept choosing, even when it broke me, even when it consumed me, even when I knew it would one day destroy me. Because to turn away, to close my eyes, to become like them, blind, silent, complicit, was a fate worse than any truth. And so I walked forward, step by step, door by door, carrying not only my own suffering, but the suffering of all I saw. Until one day, the door that opened was not of another. It was of myself. The first time I opened the door that was mine, not theirs, I felt it before I saw it. The air grew thick, pressing against my skin like a damp cloth. The keys in my pocket turned ice cold, heavier than stone. The hall inside me, with its endless rows of glowing thresholds, suddenly darkened, every door fading until only one remained visible, standing directly before me. It pulsed faintly, in rhythm with my heartbeat, and I knew at once that it belonged to me. I hesitated. For so long I had peered into the hidden corridors of others, my father's boyhood terror, my mother's stolen laughter, the secrets of neighbors and strangers alike. But to turn that sight inward, to stand before my own truth, with no veil to soften it, no excuse to deflect it, that terrified me more than any shadow. The woman was there, though she did not move, did not speak. She stood at the far end of the hall, her outline dim, her eyes fixed on me. It was not guidance she offered, nor comfort. It was expectation. She had led me here, but she would not step closer. The choice, as always, was mine. I raised the smaller key, my hand trembling. It glowed faintly, answering the rhythm of the door. The ticking of the clock grew deafening, faster and faster, until I thought my skull would crack beneath its weight. With a cry that tore from somewhere deep inside me, I thrust the key into the lock. The door swung open, and I stepped into myself. What I found there was not a single truth, but a multitude, colliding and shattering, like shards of glass in a storm. I saw myself as a child in the forest, wide-eyed and trembling, nodding to a question I did not understand. I saw myself at school, mocked and isolated, my silence mistaken for weakness. I saw myself clutching the keys beneath my blanket, my body too small to hold so much weight. But I also saw things I had never known. I saw the moment of my birth, my mother's face pale and weary, her hands reaching for me with trembling wonder. I saw my father looking down at me, not yet twisted by rage, his eyes soft for a fleeting second before the shadows claimed him. I saw the generations before me, faces I had never met, but who lived inside my blood, their own silences, their own blindnesses, their own burdens passed down like heirlooms. And then, worst of all, I saw what lay ahead. I saw myself as a woman, older, bent, my eyes heavy with truths no one wanted to hear. I saw myself alone, carrying the weight of doors upon doors, while others turned away, blind and content. I saw myself speaking to shadows, my voice thin, my hands clutching keys that had rusted into my very bones. I stumbled back, gasping, trying to slam the door shut, but it clung to me, would not release me. The vision poured into me, unstoppable, and through it all, I heard her voice, not the woman's, but my own, echoing from the depths of the hall. This is who you are. This is who you will be. Do not run. I collapsed onto the floor of the corridor, the shards of truth cutting into me from all sides. My hands bled as I tried to shield myself, but there was no shield against what was inside me. When I woke, I was in my bed, drenched in sweat, my body trembling. My mother sat nearby, her eyes red-rimmed, her hands wringing the hem of her dress. She did not speak, but her gaze lingered on me longer than usual, as though she sensed something had shifted. My father's snores rumbled through the walls, indifferent. I turned my head toward the window. Outside, the forest loomed, its branches black against the pale dawn. And I knew then that the woman had not given me a gift at all. She had given me a wound, one that would never heal, one that would only deepen with time. Don't forget, leave even the smallest sign, a word, a mark. It is how I know I am not lost in the echo of my own telling. From that day forward, everything changed. I could no longer look at myself without seeing the cracks. Each reflection in water, in glass, in the sheen of polished wood, showed me fragments of what I had glimpsed behind my own door. Sometimes I saw the child I had been, her eyes wide with wonder and terror. Sometimes I saw the old woman I would become, her face lined with sorrow. And sometimes I saw both at once, overlaid, as if time itself had collapsed inside me. The people around me seemed smaller, quieter, though their doors still burned in my sight. My father's rage no longer terrified me in the same way. It repulsed me, because I had seen the boy within him, broken long before I was born. My mother's silence no longer confused me. It enraged me, because I had seen the woman she once was, the laughter she had surrendered to darkness. Every cruelty, every silence, every act of blindness, I could see its roots now. And yet that knowledge did not free me. It chained me tighter. The woman appeared less and less. When she did, she was little more than a shadow, her body dissolving into the forest, her voice weaker. Once, when I begged her for guidance, she only shook her head and whispered, "I am only what you made of me." Those words cut deeper than any vision, because I realized she might not exist outside of me at all. She might only be the shape my own truth had taken. The question I had answered made flesh. I was alone, and yet I was not. For the doors were always with me, multiplying, pressing against the edges of my sight, whispering in every silence. Each one was a choice. Each one was a wound. And I could not stop opening them. The next one I opened was not of my family, not of myself, but of a stranger. I remember walking through the market, the air thick with the smell of damp wool and old vegetables. A woman stood at a stall, her back bent, her hands rough with work. To anyone else, she was nothing unusual, another villager among many. But to me, her chest glowed faintly. I reached into my pocket, my fingers curling around the keys, and before I could stop myself, the door inside her swung open. I saw her as a girl, younger than I was, her hands bound, her cries unheard. I saw the years of labor, the children lost, the nights of hunger. I saw the man who had broken her, his face as familiar as my father's. And I saw the silence she had chosen, the blindness she had wrapped around herself like a shroud. I stumbled, dropping the bread I carried, my stomach twisting with nausea. She turned, her eyes meeting mine for the briefest second. Did she know I had seen? Did she feel it? I will never know. She turned away quickly, resuming her bargaining, her silence unbroken. But I carried her truth with me. Another weight, another wound. The woman had been right. Sight is hunger. Once opened, it cannot stop consuming. And I was consumed. Don't forget, add your voice here, even quietly. It is the only way the burden of sight does not crush me entirely. And so I learned that the greatest door was not the one in the forest, nor the one in the house, nor even the one inside myself. The greatest door was the world itself. Everywhere I turned, thresholds waited. And with every step, I was forced to choose, blind or sight, silence or truth, And every time, though it broke me, I chose sight. Until one day I saw a door I could not bear to open. It was in my mother. It appeared so quietly at first that I thought it might be only the trembling of candlelight, or my tired eyes inventing shapes where none existed. But it remained. The faint glow in her chest, the slow pulsing as if beneath her ribs there lived not only a heart, but a hidden threshold. I had seen the doors in many before, neighbors, strangers, even the priest, but this one was different. This one belonged to her, to my mother, and I knew that once I turned the key, there would be no return. For days I tried to ignore it. I averted my gaze when she sat by the window, her hands folded, her silence heavier than stone. I turned away when she bent over the fire, her shadow stretching long across the walls. But the door did not fade. It grew brighter, more insistent, as though it was waiting for me, calling to me, daring me to finally see. The weight of the keys in my pocket became unbearable. Every step I took, I felt them against my thigh, burning, pressing, demanding. At night, when the house was still, except for my father's snores and the relentless ticking of the clock, I heard it, the faint rattle of a handle turning from within her. I pressed my hands over my ears, but the sound was inside me, echoing in my chest. Don't forget. If these words still reach you, leave even the smallest mark. It tells me that I am not opening these doors alone in the dark. One evening, when the air smelled of damp wood and smoke, she sat by the window as always, her eyes fixed on something I could not see. The glow beneath her ribs flickered faintly, like a lantern guttering in the wind. I rose from my bed, the keys trembling in my hand, and I walked toward her. She did not turn her head. She did not stop me. Perhaps she knew. Perhaps she had been waiting all along. I placed the smaller key against the lock that only I could see. It slid in as though it had always belonged there. The door opened with a whisper, and I stepped through. What I found was not what I had expected. I thought I would see pain, the hollow years of silence, the blows she had endured, the laughter stolen from her. And I did see those. I saw her as a girl, running barefoot through fields, her voice alive with song. I saw the day that song was silenced, the day a hand claimed her, the day her will was broken. I saw her wedding night, her eyes wide, her body trembling. I saw the years of labor, the children she lost, the nights she sat awake while the man beside her slept in drunken oblivion. But I saw more than pain. I saw love. Love she had never spoken, never shown, but carried like a secret flame. Love for me, for the child she could not protect, but could not stop hoping for. I saw the nights she lay awake, watching me breathe, her hands hovering above me, but never daring to touch. I saw her pressing her face into the blanket to muffle her sobs, her body shaking with the weight of a grief she could never voice. And I saw her choice. The silence was not only fear, it was her way of carrying me, her way of shielding me, even if it was not enough. She had chosen blindness not because she wanted it, but because she believed it was the only way to keep me alive. I stumbled back, tears burning in my eyes, the truth slicing through me sharper than any blow. All my anger, all my bitterness, all the years I had hated her for her silence cracked open in that moment. I wanted to fall into her arms, to tell her I had seen, to tell her I understood. But when I reached for her, the vision dissolved, and I was only a girl again, standing before a woman staring out the window, her eyes empty, her mouth closed, the door shut behind me with a sound like finality. From that night on, I carried her silence differently. It was no longer only a wound. It was also a sacrifice. But that knowledge did not free me. It bound me tighter. because now I carried not only my truth, but hers as well. And the hunger of sight did not stop. It never stops. Years passed. The doors never left me. I opened more than I can count, some by choice, others by accident. I saw the truths of strangers on the road, of children in the market, of old women bent with grief. Each one became a part of me, each one a weight I bore. I grew older, my body taller, my face sharper, but inside I remained the same haunted, hollowed, restless. The woman from the forest appeared less and less. The last time I saw her, she was barely more than a shadow, her body dissolving into the trees. I asked her if this was the end, if I would one day find the final door, the one that would close all others. She smiled her broken smile and whispered, "There is no final door. There is only the last one you dare to open." And then she was gone. I never saw her again. But her absence was not emptiness. It was inheritance. For I had become her. I was the woman in the forest, the figure no one else could see, the voice that asks the question, "Do you want to know who you are, or stay blind?" I carried that question through my life, through years of loss and fleeting moments of joy, through the faces of people who came and went. Some looked at me and turned away, choosing blindness. A few met my gaze and trembled as though they had glimpsed the door within themselves. To them I gave no comfort, only the question. It was all I had to give. And now, as I sit here, old and bent, the keys still heavy in my hands, the ticking of the clock still marking every breath, I know the truth that has lived with me all along. The doors were never only in others. They were never only in me. They are everywhere, in everything. Every silence is a door. Every secret, every wound, every unspoken word. And each of us carries the keys, though most never dare to use them. I dared. It did not save me. It did not free me. It broke me, remade me, consumed me. But it gave me truth. And though truth is heavier than any chain, it is also the only light that cannot be extinguished. So I tell this now, with what strength I have left, not as warning, not as comfort, but as offering. For you too carry doors within you. And one day you will hear the question, do you want to know who you are, or stay blind? When that day comes, remember me. Remember the woman in the forest, the girl with the keys, the silence that was never empty. Remember that sight is hunger, and hunger will never be satisfied. But if you choose it, if you dare, you will know. And once you know, nothing and no one can ever take it from you. So listen. So look. So answer. Do you want to know who you are, or stay blind? The clock is still ticking, and the door is waiting.